Welcome back, builders. This explainer was made by Forge College, and I am your host and chief engineer for today. So if you joined us for our previous lesson on the foundations of smart contract security, you already know the high-level theories of what keeps a protocol safe. But, theory only gets us so far. Today, we are taking those abstract concepts and putting on our hard hats. We're transitioning from high-level architecture into practical, line-by-line code blueprints. We are going to look at exactly how you should be drafting your contracts to keep the hackers and, honestly, your own sleep-deprived 2 a.m. coding mistakes at bay.
Here is the master schematic for today's build, drawn out for us here. We'll start with the defensive mindset, then look at a vault refactor, unpack the golden rule of checks and effects, discuss minimizing privileges, and finally, wrap up with your audit-ready checklist. All right, Section 1. The defensive coding mindset. Before we write a single line of code, we really have to understand our environment. The smart contract ecosystem is not some friendly, controlled sandbox. It is a dark forest, and a lazy coder's assumptions will absolutely get their vault drained. We have to draft our blueprints assuming that everything outside our immediate control is actively trying to break it. We have to anticipate partial failures. We have to expect adversarial sequencing, which basically means attackers are going to try to call your functions in an order you never intended, just to see what explodes. And we literally must assume all inputs are malicious until proven otherwise. You're no longer just writing code to make things work, you are writing code to prevent it from being exploited by someone whose full-time job is breaking your stuff. Moving right into Section 2, the vault refactor. Let's look at exactly what happens when we don't code defensively. Look at the vulnerable withdrawal function we have sketched out first. Notice the order of operations there. It grabs the user's balance, sends them the money via an external call, and only then does it set their balance to 0. It's kind of like a bank teller handing over the gold bars, turning their back to grab a cup of coffee, and then eventually remembering to update the ledger. This invites a reentrancy attack. A malicious contract can intercept that external call and loop back in to withdraw again and again and again before the balance is ever zeroed out. No way we want that. Now, look at the secure version next to it. We set the balance to 0 before we make the external call. We update the books first, then hand over the cash. Which brings us to Section 3. Checks, effects, interactions. This is the golden rule of Web3 engineering. This core principle fixes that vault problem and saves millions of dollars in Web3. If you remember absolutely nothing else from this explainer, remember this. The CEI pattern breaks every single public function down into 3 distinct steps. Step 1, checks. Step 2, effects. Step 3, interactions. I actually like to explain this pattern using the analogy of an exclusive nightclub. To run a safe club, you need 3 people working in strict order: the bouncer, the ledger, and the cashier.
Step 1 is checks, or as I call it, the bouncer at the door. Every externally callable function should check inputs, caller roles, and state preconditions before doing anything else, like we see in this require statement, ensuring the user actually has a balance greater than 0. The bouncer is strictly verifying IDs and inputs. And notice how we include a clear, machine-parsable error message, vault 0 balance. If you don't meet the criteria, the bouncer kicks you out immediately with a clear reason.
Okay, Step 2 is effects. Think of this as the accountant in the back room with the ledger. Once the bouncer lets you in, we immediately update the internal state. We decrement balances, set flags, update mappings, you name it. The absolute crucial point here is that we change our internal state before anyone is allowed to interact with the outside world. By setting the balance to 0 here, we ensure that even if things get crazy later, our internal accounting is already locked in and secure.
Finally, Step 3 is interactions, representing the cashier. This is any call to transfer funds or any interaction with an external contract. The cashier hands the money out the window, and this is done absolutely last. By doing this at the very end, we completely minimize the attack surface. If the caller tries to be clever and re-enter our contract during this step, they're just going to hit the bouncer again. The bouncer will see the ledger now says their balance is 0, and they'll be promptly rejected. Checks, effects, interactions. Simple as that.
Section 4. Minimizing contract privileges. So we've secured the transaction flow, but who actually holds the master keys to this mechanical vault we're building? And how much power do they really have? I want you to internalize this quote: always assume external calls can re-enter, and make the smallest trust assumptions about callers. This is the philosophy of least privilege. In our other Forge College learning programs, we constantly see entire protocols fail, not because of some complex math bug, but simply because administrators were given way too much unchecked power.
If an admin key is compromised or an owner function is just too broad, the blast radius is catastrophic. We need to encapsulate privileged roles and strictly limit what they can do. As an engineer, you're going to want to heavily prefer the pull pattern over the push pattern. If your contract has an owner function that automatically pushes ether or tokens out to a massive list of users, a single malicious or reverting fallback function in that list can block the entire operation. It's a huge bottleneck. Instead, use the pull pattern. The contract simply credits an internal balance for each user, and the users themselves must call a claim function to withdraw their own funds. This eliminates blocking operations, reduces the scope of privileged push actions, and keeps your protocol moving smoothly.
Finally, Section 5, your audit-ready checklist. Let's assemble our final engineering schematic.
Here is your daily coding blueprint. Item 1. Explicit require checks at the top of functions. Why? Well, it simplifies test coverage and makes preconditions super obvious. Item 2. Minimize privileges. This directly reduces the concentration of risk. Item 3. CEI ordering. Checks, effects, interactions. This is your primary defense to prevent reentrance and reduce exploit windows. Item 4. Short, structured revert messages. This vastly improves monitoring and alerting. And finally, Item 5, emit clear events. This absolutely supports post-deployment forensics and helps off-chain tooling track your contract's health.
So, to summarize these final specifications, check your inputs and roles right at the entry door. Always update your state before you make external calls, encapsulate and strictly limit your privileged roles, prefer pull-over push for any sort of value transfer, and finally, use structured, machine-parsable errors and events. This checklist isn't just for writing code. This is exactly the framework you're going to take into our next lesson, Introduction to Security Audits, where we'll learn exactly how auditors scrutinize your work.
I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. If your contract was attacked tomorrow, would your error logs tell you exactly what failed? Or would you be left staring at a blank terminal, just guessing what went wrong out there in the dark forest? Building defensively means building with foresight. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer created by Forge College. To master your Web3 engineering skills and dive deeper into this subject and many others, be sure to visit forge.college. Keep building, keep learning, and stay secure.